Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Todd Clark. I am the Senior IT Support Specialist at GetWell. And for those of you not familiar with GetWell, we are a global digital health company with more than 20 years of digital patient engagement experience. As a company, we partner in over 50 million patient interactions each year across nearly 1,000 client sites. We focus on facilitating high-quality, personalized patient care by engaging patients, educating families, and empowering clinicians. My team and I are extremely privileged in that we get to support the incredible employees at GetWell that make all this cool stuff happen. With me today is Jeremy Lynch, the Chief Information Security Officer at GetWell. Yes, the reference CISO in the title of this presentation, and also my boss.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lynch, the CISO here at GetWell. I've been a part of GetWell now for a little over 7 years. The IT team is one of the few teams here that I manage, and since Todd coming on, he's made a massive impact here at GetWell across the internal IT organization. I'm going to mostly just sit back through this, and I'll occasionally chime in with some security-related topics, but I'm mostly here to be a cheerleader for Todd and the amazing work he's been able to achieve. Go, Todd.
Thank you. I didn't pay him to say that, but I did write it for him. So once again, welcome to How to Keep Your CISO Happy with Automation, which I really wanted to call How to Keep Your Happy Through Standardization and Automation while spending your afternoons getting paid to watch funny videos on the internet. But that title was entirely too long, so How to Keep Your CISO Happy with Automation it is. In this session, we're going to talk about GetWell's Jamf Pro journey into automation over the last 18 months. And my hope is that we pass along some information or a best practice tip or some tool that maybe wasn't on your radar that you can take back and implement into your environment. Fingers crossed. Here we go. When I started at GetWell, I was tasked with bringing several of their internal IT processes into focus, making them my own, improving them if possible, and implementing them. There were three main areas that Jeremy asked me to tackle first. Standardizing the systems we use for device management, which is Jamf Pro for the Mac, automating our software deployments, and hardening our systems to the CIS and NIST benchmarks and standards. Sure, absolutely. No problem. I can do that. Those are the words that came out of my mouth, but in my head, my mind is running 100 miles per minute. I'm slightly panicked. And most of all, what's a NIST? Up to that point in my career, I'd spent most of my professional life supporting faculty and staff of a university. Sure, I'd ventured out into the commercial world and had a little bit of success, but I'd never been tasked with hardening systems. I guess that was what the really smart people did while I sat at the kids' table dreaming of one day seeing the full Jamf Pro while playing with iPad cards. Why did I say I could do all those things?
For those of you like Todd who don't know NIST, it's a set of guidelines for mitigating the organizational cybersecurity risks. It's published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and that's where you get the NIST acronym. It's based on a set of existing standards, guidelines, and practices that have been agreed upon as being a safe and sane set of baselines for you to start off with that provides a high level of cybersecurity outcomes and methodology to assess and manage those outcomes. Over the last few years, GetWell has sought and obtained a number of certifications. Right now, we're SOC 2 Type 2 certified. We're in the process of getting our FedRAMP certification, and by the end of this year, we'll be getting our HITRUST CSF. Due to the requirements of these certifications, we have to harden our systems to a specific level, and that's really what I've tasked Todd to go about and do. Todd?
It's actually a very interesting documentation to read through and absorb, but we'll get back to that topic in a bit. For me, the first task I decided to tackle was standardizing the systems we use for device management, mainly Jamf Pro. As an organization, our employees are mostly Apple and Mac OS users, but there's a few of the other guys out there too. But picture this, it's my first week at Get Well. I'm looking around in our Jamf Pro, trying to get a feel for where we are as a company and as a support team. And I'm truly shocked, but not in the good way. Almost every policy we had was set to run repeatedly at every check-in. Some did nothing, while others would repeatedly install the same application over and over again. And some of those policies had names that made zero sense to anyone other than the person who had created them. We had advanced searches, whose purpose was, I guess, to confuse the next person or find a guitar. We had configuration profiles that were either scoped to all computers or no computers, nothing in between. Some appeared to be there to test something, but then were just forgotten, never removed. And there were smart groups that were not used for scoping, and one just to find all of our Jeremys, which was surprisingly useful. Okay, so these on-screen examples are slightly exaggerated for comedic effect, but some are actual names from what I will forever refer to as the dark ages of our Jamf Pro. Needless to say, it was a mess, and it was time to give our Jamf Pro some TLC. So during one of our early team meetings, we cleared our normal topics and we dedicated the entire meeting to deliberating on a standard naming convention for Jamf Pro. We went over each area of the Jamf Pro and we came up with a standard for each item. I won't cover them all, but as a few examples, policies, who it affects, what the policy does. Configuration profiles, who it affects and what the profile does. Smart and static groups, the reason to scope and what to scope. And advanced searches, the scope of the search and what the criteria is. And for better or worse, these became our standards. And I feel this is really important for several reasons, but mostly because it allows you to keep things inside your Jamf Pro simple, organized, and readable. When you're scrolling through, yes, you can search, but I'm a scroller. So when you're scrolling through 200 plus policies, having them all with a standardized naming convention, that's going to help you find the one you want faster. And it just looks nice. So after we went and standardized things, we realized there was a lot of duplication and extra stuff in our Jamf Pro. We need to clean things up, or we'd never get to the point where automation was going to be of much help. Using Grandpu's Spruce 3, I was able to locate and delete most of the crufty, and that's a great word, Graham, crufty, packages within our and policies and scripts that had built up within our Jamf Pro. Sadly, or maybe inevitably, Spruce is no longer being maintained, but Leslie, Big Rat's prune, is stepping up to fill that space, and I do use that regularly now. And if I could just real quick, side note, and it's because I like to be gracious whenever possible, Graham has always been helpful if I've ever had questions or been stuck, and Leslie as well. In general, I'm not a very outgoing person, which is why I work in IT. But I had a question after a Swift presentation that Leslie had given at a JNUC a few years back. And I waited about 2 weeks to follow up with my question, knowing full well that I was just bothering someone with a question that they weren't going to answer anyways. But Leslie couldn't have been nicer, and it helped a ton in a project that it didn't end up seeing the light of day. And again, I want to tell that story because it's been my experience that this Mac admins and Jamf community is very welcoming. And please don't be afraid if you have a question to ask that question or questions when you get stuck. But let's get back to this presentation. So at this point, our policies, searches, config profiles, and groups have all been standardized. We've lost most of the bloat inside of our Jamf Pro server, and it's time to move on to automating our deployments. There are probably an infinite number of approaches to automation. Today, I'm going to discuss the ones that we've implemented at Get Well, because these are the ones that work best for us. Obviously, your organization has its own needs, but I feel these tools are essential to any Mac admin. Where does he get all of those wonderful toys? Indeed. Now, before I get into where the tools that we use for automation, I want to quickly backtrack to where we were 18 months ago. Most of our Macs were set up manually and then set out to employees. We had the capability to use automated device enrollment. We just weren't taking advantage of it. So that wasn't part of our toolbox. Updating software was sort of attempted, mostly, like I said earlier, through policies that ran on check-in and would constantly reinstall software over and over again. And I guess that's technically automation, but it isn't a very good user experience. We also had a system where I or another member of the team would log onto the Jamf Pro late at night and push the update either through a check-in policy or a patch management policy. This will go out to our employees' computers in the hopes that they were turned on and not shut down, so that when they came into work the next day, they'd have the latest and greatest version of the app. What ended up happening is we would get more tickets because in almost every case, Chrome was open during the update and now it doesn't work anymore. Again, not very great user experiences all around. So how do we turn this around? Fast. That was fast. Let's talk about some wonderful toys. And we're going to start with enrollment customization. And I want to start with enrollment customization because it's the first new thing an employee sees when they get their computer and they go through their onboarding. When I started to get well, I immediately wanted to take advantage of this because you get to put your branding front and center when you're setting up your new devices. Here we are. Welcome to the team. We do use an Active Directory integration in our Jamf Pro, so this allows us to link the computer to the user during enrollment. A temporary password is provided to a new employee, or an existing employee can use their current password. They authenticate and tie the computer to their user. And then to go along with that, our company-wide password requirements state that the password cannot be the AD password. So the user gets to go through creating their local account and the local password during setup. And having the new employee go through the enrollment process like this gives us a chance to discuss our password policies and explain them to them without coming across as heavy-handed. We have our password policy configuration in Jamf Pro scoped to the pre-stage, and that ensures that the password meets our requirements. Once enrollment is complete, our good friend DEP Notify kicks in, puts on a little show, lets the employee know exactly what's happening on the device. And since moving to automated device enrollment, the feedback from our orientations and our onboarding has been very positive. So enrollment customization is complete. Our employee has a new computer, hooray, but how do we keep the software up to date? Yes, that's the million-dollar question I'm sure at least some of you face every single day. To discuss how we're updating softwares on systems, let's first discuss some of the requirements I was given during the planning process for setting all this up, because maybe you face something similar. Make the updates invisible. They have to happen in the background and should not interrupt someone's workday. They need to be unobtrusive, so no annoying pop-ups or notifications, no badging apps, etc. The employees must have the option to upgrade on their own time as they had been doing in the past, as long as it's within a reasonable time frame. And it must encompass system updates, third-party apps, and security updates. No pressure, right? I've been a champion of self-service ever since the first time I saw it a long time ago in a JSS far, far away. Moving to an automated model with these requirements meant that this was something I would have to really plan out. And believe me, I was scratching my head. Where do I turn? Enter auto package. There are a lot of sessions from JNUCs in the past and other gatherings about auto package. So I'm not really going to go into the nuts and bolts of how it all works. I'll summarize it for you with this. Auto package and the community around it is amazing. Somebody somewhere in the world creates a recipe, shares it, and you can use it to create packages for your organization, update your software, and make your employees happy, which is exactly what we wanted, right? Sort of. Don't forget, in my scenario, I needed to make the updates happen without any user interaction and without throwing a ton of alerts at our employees. And it turns out they're not a fan of being bothered, especially in the middle of a client presentation. Oh, and I would also need to create all my own recipes from scratch to make the CISO more comfortable with what I was trying to accomplish.
For me, it was important that we had complete control over what was being downloaded, created, and installed on our computers. And while I've come to learn more about Auto Package since we started this project, and from some of my own dabblings into how it actually works, I know a lot of you in the Jamf and Mac admin community put a lot of work and pride into your recipes, and that's really awesome. I keep pushing Todd to trying to create his own recipes. And even though sometimes he creates overrides, as that's really the only way for us to get that working at the time, I do like to make sure he has complete control and is aware of every little bit that's going on within there. That way, I can make sure that he keeps making it all work seamlessly behind the scenes.
So while I could probably spend the next 20 to 30 minutes having a gush fest about how great Auto Package is, I thought I'd talk about some of our challenges and how we overcame them. I will preface this by emphasizing I am not a developer by trade, and XML is not a format I was or am intimately familiar with. In initial testing, the thing that stuck out right away was that our policies and smart groups that are created by the default settings in Auto Package don't meet our naming convention that we set up earlier. Thankfully, Auto Package has the capability for customization, and since I was writing all my own recipes, with a little help from Recipe Robot and a peek or two at some of the wonderful recipes that you have all written, I was slowly able to piece together what worked best for us. So let's talk about some of those customizations. Separate policy templates for auto installs and self-service installs. If you're familiar with the Jamf API and how policies appear in XML format, these are pretty self-explanatory. I want to show the differences, although minor, in the templates used in the recipes. We trigger our auto install policies for update on startup, and self-service policies are in self-service, of course. I played around with login or just check-in triggers, but found that startup worked the best. While it may delay the employee's ability to get going as soon as they sit down, it didn't interrupt their day once they were going. As you can hopefully see, most of the major name variables, policy name, policy category, group name, etc., come from the recipe itself, which we'll get to in a few slides. Next up is group templates. We have separate group templates, and this is where the real customization for Auto Package starts to happen. But again, we're not recreating the wheel here. We have different group templates for different types of installs. A self-service group template that scopes to all of our deployed or managed Macs for general self-service apps. An automatic install group for auto updates if the computer falls out of scope of the current version being installed. I've tried using this with a matching regex or the version number, but regex is one of the dark arts, so I will leave that up to the wizards and warlocks of the world. The third template is how we scope software to only certain computers. If someone is approved for, let's say, Microsoft Office, we have a static group, add their computer to that static group, and then Auto Package makes a smart group based on that static group. Some of you might say this is duplicative. Agreed. But it works for us, and it does make our Jamf Pro and Auto Package workflow much smoother. Lastly, some of our apps are required to be installed on every Mac, and we always want the most up-to-date version of that app, like Chrome. Or maybe there's an app that has a custom extension attribute like Zoom. In those cases, we have an auto install template that looks at the custom extension attribute to determine if the app is installed. If not, install it, or if it is installed and not the current version, update the app. And that's how we do custom templates. This, of course, leads to separate recipes depending on the template that we're wanting to take advantage of. Auto install recipes have a few less keys set because they don't need self-service information. We've standardized the naming scheme for these as well. We name these ending in -auto. Self-service install recipes add the self-service keys, sometimes the version, maybe a few other things. We name these ending in -ss. Lastly, I use the Jamf Pro to keep everything up to date. I have two scripts, one to update Auto Package repos. This script runs every night. The second script handles double duty depending on the recipe list. Every night it runs to update any of the crucial auto updates that we have, and every Monday night it runs on the recipe list for all of our self-service apps. Yes, there are probably better ways to automate this, but I like the logging that gets returned back to Jamf Pro so I can see any of the changes that were made. I get to come in each morning. I see 3 green 100% circles, and I'm happy to start my day knowing that this afternoon I can watch funny videos. And that's a very brief rundown of our customizations for Auto Package, and I'll be happy to answer any questions afterwards or take improvement suggestions. Okay, we've customized the enrollment, and now we're updating the applications through automation. But if you recall from like 2 minutes ago, I said we apply updates at startup. And I can hear your thoughts, or at least a few people's thoughts. Employees don't like to restart their computer. How do you get them to restart? This is where the curse of old Maggie comes in. You see, old Maggie keeps watch on all of our computers. She waits in the shadows, lurking, waiting, watching, until you're so involved in a project that you've turned out the outside world completely, and then boom, she strikes. Thankfully, it's not that spooky in reality, and I was trying a little bit of light tricks there that probably didn't come across as funny to anybody, but I liked it. Sorry. What we're doing is we're using an extension attribute to calculate uptime, and once a computer hits 10 days, a Jamf alert, who we've lovingly named Old Maggie, shows up to remind our employees to restart. They're then given some options on when to restart: 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 4 hours, 10 hours. And these are the times that best work for our environment. Obviously, they can be customized. Those of you that have used the Jamf alert framework probably recognize Old Maggie, but I actually based Old Maggie off of the Better Jamf deferral tool. That tool, however, uses Python libraries, and because of the Python apocalypse of 2022, I rewrote most of it in Bash last year. Admittedly, it's not an exact recreation of the tool, but it does what we need it to do. In the background, the script first checks for the launch daemon it's going to create, does it find it, creates it, and then alerts the employee to the time they chose for the restart to happen. Thankfully, nobody ever forgets what they chose, though, and they're always prepared for that restart. 1 minute before the scheduled restart, the employee receives an alert letting them know that their scheduled restart will happen in 1 minute and to please quit and save their work. Upon startup, policy runs to remove the launch daemon, and our apps that need to be updated get updated. But just to be sure Old Maggie doesn't strike twice, every night at midnight or shortly thereafter, another policy runs to check any non-cursed Macs for that launch daemon and removes it if found. And while not a perfect solution, it does keep our employees aware of the need to restart, and it's greatly improved our patch numbers without having to force install patches on computers. And so that is the curse of Old Maggie. The last tool I want to talk about needs no introduction. If you're not using Nudge, you need to use Nudge. Sometimes a tool comes along and makes what we do so much easier than it should be, and Nudge has been that tool for me. Rewind in time again to February 2021. macOS Big Sur had been out for nearly 4 months, and most of GetWell were still stuck on Catalina. Historically, and per Jeremy's orders, our organization's goal was to update at the .1 release of every version of macOS. Through begging, pleading, Google Meeting, Zooming, etc., it took until late June of 2021 for us to upgrade our entire fleet to Big Sur, nearly 8 months after release. This was not going to be a viable solution going forward. We needed some way to automate this and make our upgrades go much smoother. I'd heard of Nudge, but again, never had the opportunity to play around with it. But based on the amount of time we took to get to Big Sur, something had to give. So I downloaded Nudge and I started playing around with the configuration. Within 30 minutes of trying it out, I deployed it to our test group of computers. I was that sure it was the right tool. Cut to this past December, macOS Monterey 12.1 was released on December 13th. I waited until after the holidays to unblock Monterey and push Nudge out company-wide. I created documentation to explain what Nudge was, how to use it, why to use it, etc. I had hoped to get mild buy-in, and I fully expected to have to return to the begging and pleading that we'd used in the past. I'm delighted to report that usage was immediate. We had 1/4 of the company on macOS Monterey on January 5th, which was the day I deployed Nudge. Within 3 weeks, we were over 90% and got to 98% by the end of January. This was an unprecedented accomplishment at GetWell. And that is how we went from taking 8 months to upgrade our fleet to 45 days. all thanks to Nudge. And those are the wonderful toys. So we've standardized, we've automated, and now we're going to harden our systems.
As a global software company in the healthcare space, GetWell has to meet a lot of strict standards when it comes to security. As you would expect, we have all the typical training, monitoring, and all of those fun things that go on in the security side. But because of those, we have a whole lot of hardening that we actually want to do to our employee systems to make sure they meet the strict guidelines that we actually have. And I wanted Todd to actually go through and show some of the great work that he's been able to implement on our Mac fleet.
I'm going to highlight just a few of the things that our team has implemented over the last 12 to 18 months to assist Jeremy's team and the company as a whole in hardening our systems. Local password policy. I mentioned earlier that while we have an instance of AD, we don't bind our Macs to AD. And while that debate continues among others in this community, as a mostly non-Microsoft related tools company, there are a few diehards, I'm happy that we don't do this. What that means is that we needed a way to ensure our password policies were being met with local user accounts. Prior to implementing this through Jamf, we would just stress the importance of a strong password and would ask everyone to make their password strong, but we had no way to enforce it. Now that we're using automated device enrollment, and we can ensure that one of the first things a new user or someone receiving a replacement computer will do is set their local password to something that meets our standards. It's a pretty simple thing to accomplish in Jamf Pro. Create the config profile with your standards and deploy it to the new systems within a pre-stage. File Vault 2, I can't think of a reason not to use File Vault, but just make sure you're doing it right within Jamf Pro. And I bring this up because every once in a while, we still have to look up a recovery key from an Excel spreadsheet for systems that were not set up to escrow their keys to Jamf Pro. Again, doesn't happen much these days, but it was very common 12 to 18 months ago. The CIS benchmarks and the macOS Security Compliance Project. Most of the settings and preferences needed to ensure compliance within these two security frameworks can be accomplished within Jamf Pro. Most. There are some that require a little tweaking, a little ingenuity, and maybe a little luck in finding the right way to do it. And this is where Jeremy likes to test me and my team. He'll run a report to see if there's something missing or if we could potentially be docked for a finding, and then he sends over the results. If you haven't visited these sites and hardening your systems is important to your organization, I would highly recommend them. I'll put them up again in a minute, but I want to share an example here. Within the documentation of these frameworks, they provide you with the command to run, and they'll tell you what the result should be. If you do not receive that result, that's a finding, and you need to fix it. Many times they'll even tell you how to fix it. Sometimes the fix is a little bit abstract, and you'll have to do more research. Many times you'll need to run a script or create a config profile in Jamf Pro. This can be daunting unless you happen to know every single plist file name and configuration on the Mac. I do not. That's where, back to the links again, Profile Creator and more specifically Profile Manifests come in. Elliot Jordan, whose recipe robot I mentioned earlier, is a madman and has figured out a way to convert all or almost all of Apple's plist configurations into JSON schemas and posted them for the Mac admins community to use. I found these to be an invaluable tool for to make sure we meet the security benchmarks our organization is aiming for. Obviously, and this goes for all the settings and tools discussed today, do the research, discuss with your team and your CISO to find the solutions that will work best for your organization. That concludes our main focuses and topics for today. Once again, my name is Todd Clark, TD Clark on the Mac Admin Slack, and that is Jeremy Lynch. And thank you all for attending, listening, and watching.